Are you terrified of trying again after pregnancy loss? Are you scared that this cycle won't work, the next cycle won't work, and that you'll never be a parent? Are you pregnant after loss or after fertility treatments and it just feels like this is too good to be true? You're just waiting for something bad to happen. This journey is full of fear and worry and anxiety, and after a while we feel like that's just how it is. But today's guest will show you that this isn't something you need to live with, that there are ways to work through the trauma of what you've experienced and to make your life feel lighter and easier in the process.
Welcome to your journey to fertility. This is the podcast that blends both science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Here each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so you can stop stressing that you'll never have a baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I am very excited for today's guest. Parijat Deshpande is the founder of Ruvel, and this is the only truly trauma-informed company specifically dedicated to supporting women through fertility challenges, improving high-risk pregnancy outcomes, reducing preterm birth, and supporting parents to pass on generational health. On a mission to end the high-risk pregnancy crisis, she has served and supported thousands of clients through her live events, virtual courses, one-on-one consulting, and her best-selling book, Pregnancy Brain, A Mind-Body Approach to Stress Management During a High-Risk Pregnancy. I have been low-level stalking Parijat for ages now. Her book is amazing, and her podcast is a must-listen for anyone who is pregnant after infertility or loss, or is struggling on the journey of getting there. What I love about her is the way that she describes really heavy and complex issues in such a gentle and understanding way, because this subject matter is heavy and she has been through the full gamut of it, which you'll hear about as she shares her own story today. And as I'm sure you know, I am so passionate about this work. I think that supporting your nervous system is the basis for everything else that you do and everything that you can do to help yourself when you're trying to conceive. I wish I had known about this work years ago. So it's my hope that it resonates with you here today. Here's Parijat. Parijat, I am so thrilled to have you on the podcast today. When you agreed to come on, I did a little bit of a dance around the living room, got very excited, and then my very nerdy brain just went into overdrive, coming up with gazillion questions to go through with you. So I'm really excited for this conversation and everything that you're going to share with my listeners. So welcome. Can we start by learning a little bit about you and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm so excited to be chatting with you as well. So the work that I do is primarily with people who have experienced loss, preterm birth, or NICU stays in previous pregnancies, and they're wanting to get pregnant again and have a healthy, high-risk pregnancy next time is kind of the shorthand for it. And what we mean by that is I help them kind of work through how to fill in the gaps left by the medical field and the mental health field to ensure that we support them to mitigate as many risks as possible to stack the deck in their favor for their next pregnancy.
And it's always, I think, helpful to speak to someone who comes from this work, from their own personal experience and understanding. And I feel like you went through the whole gamut from, fertility to IVF to a difficult pregnancy and a difficult birth. Could you mind sharing a little bit about the journey that you went through?
Absolutely. Yeah. So just like you said, I don't think I would have ever done this work had I not been through it myself. I was kind of going down a more traditional path for my career. And it was really that lived experience of, we were one of those couples that knew we would have fertility challenges because of some health issues that I have. So we weren't one of those couples that tried and kept trying and going, what's not why isn't it happening? What's going on? But we kind of knew we would have to get some help pretty early on. So I still even remember the look on my reproductive endocrinologist's face of like, you're very young. Why are you here? Like, well, let me catch you up. So, we started early and we went through fertility treatments ourselves. We did IUI, and that resulted in a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. And I'm sure all of your listeners know that, but if they're not aware, that just means the embryo implants outside of the uterus. And for me, it implanted in the fallopian tube, which is usually where it implants, not always, but usually. And it outgrew the space. And so my fallopian tube ruptured, which results in internal bleeding. And it's an emergency. So I had an emergency surgery to remove that. And it took me some time to realize that was actually life-saving surgery. Took some time to get to that place to be able to say it that way. And then after that, we went to IVF because we knew that IUIs would very likely, with my remaining tube, probably would not work, or best case, probably I would have another ectopic pregnancy. So we jumped to IVF, and I did get pregnant on my first round of IVF. And that is a pregnancy that resulted in multiple pregnancy complications. I ended up in hospital at 22 weeks and 4 days. They were preparing me to lose the baby. We were doing everything that we could. And it was that experience when I thought, this is it. If this is the last straw, then I want to give it everything I've got, as anyone would. So I consented to all the medical treatment. And I also asked if it would be okay if I kind of did what I thought my body needed at the time, and really started kind of diving a little bit into just intuitive somatic work. There's no plan. I was just kind of going, what do I need to do to keep this baby inside? And it worked. Combination of the medication plus what I was doing would stop the contractions. You could see it on the monitors every single time. And when I would stop, or if they were trying to taper me off the meds, the contractions would come back. But really, no matter what the dosage of the medication was, if I stopped doing this intuitive kind of somatic work, if you will, the contractions always came back. And so they were giving me 72 hours, and I was able to help prolong the pregnancy by 15 days. And that was just long enough to give him a chance at life. He was still born very, very early. He was born at 24 weeks and 5 days. So that kind of started another phase of our journey, which was a lengthy NICU stay, but it was just long enough to give him a chance. And here we are.
Wow, 24 weeks. My goodness. You hear about premature pregnancies and births, and you just think, gosh, the tiny, tiny little life that you must be holding in your hands, and just all of the thoughts that come along with that. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Can you explain, you've mentioned a couple of times this idea of intuitive somatic work. What is somatic work?
Yeah, absolutely. So somatic work is a really vague term. Somatic just means of the body. So it's any body-based work. It can be breath work, it can be yoga, it can be physical therapy, it can be occupational therapy, it can be fitness training. It's anything to do with the body. That's just kind of the shorthand that we use to talk about the work that we do at Ruvel, because it's just easy to understand or kind of get some kind of shared language around. But what we do specifically, which is kind of rooted from my personal experience. So there's no plan, like I said, with what I was just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall when I was pregnant. But later when I was like, no, there must be something to this. There has, I'm not that lucky, or that's too coincidental. There must be some science to it. And I wanted proof. And so when I looked into it, what we find is that specifically sensory and sensory motor work, which is tied to the sensory system and our movement patterns, is actually really closely tied to supporting the nervous system in a way that can be tied to improving pregnancy outcomes. And so that's when I say somatic, that's what I mean. That's just such a mouthful. So I just say somatic until we have a conversation.
No, it's such a buzzword these days, isn't it? You hear about somatic healing, you have these somatic tools, and people are always asking, what does this mean? And like literally it's your body and anything that you can connect to with your body, basically.
Yeah.
And then speaking about this idea of being able to get better pregnancy outcomes, perhaps support your fertility journey, support your pregnancy. And I mean, you were literally talking about the life or the death of your baby within these 15 days that you were able to prolong your pregnancy. It was a game changer. And it's funny that you say, you're receiving all of the medical treatments and you consented to having all of that, but it was the work that you were doing that actually made the biggest difference. So what were you actually doing? I assume you were lying in the hospital. You couldn't really go anywhere. So what were you doing to make this happen?
Yeah, I was lying in the hospital. I was not allowed to get up, and I was actually lying upside down. I was in Trendelenburg. So, which I don't recommend if you don't need it. I don't recommend it because the head rush.
Wow.
It's intense. But sometimes you need it. And so here we are, right? That's what I was doing. So what I noticed was in my spaghetti throwing phase of this work was that we brace ourselves when we're scared. And that is supposed to happen, right? We're supposed to do that. And we either brace for impact or we're bracing to move, right? And in the case of this, I can say this now looking back and understanding the science behind it. At that time, I had absolutely no idea why. I was like, I don't care. I know this is working. So when we brace for either movement or bracing for impact, our blood flow changes. The way that our muscles move or don't move change, right? Access to certain postural patterns change. And that's in addition to the fact that I was only in one posture the whole time. I was doing one movement, which is nothing, right? I was laying as still as possible. And we know that when that kind of shift happens in the body, there's a cascading effect, both in the endocrine system and the immune system, right? And so what I was doing, I know this now, did not know that back then. What I was doing back then was I was trying to not just relax my body, because I think that's where a lot of these kind of pop psychology, if you will, somatic tips come into play, is it stops or interrupts the pattern. And what actually needs to happen is we need to complete the pattern. We need to complete the movement. And so what I would do is I would go in harder, right? So I wasn't just relaxing my body. I'll just give a quick example. Like if my hand was in a fist, I'm not trying to open it and relax it. My body seems to feel for some reason that it needs to be balled up. So I'm going to go in harder until I have the impulse to let go. And you can actually try it for yourself. You get to feel what that impulse feels like. If you ball your fist long enough, eventually your body is going to tell you, maybe stop, right? And it's not a thought. It's not something we think. It's an impulse from the body to go, we don't need this anymore. And from there, that's when I was able to release tension. And it was the release of that tension, not the relaxation, but the release of that tension that helped, I think, do whatever it needed to do to help slow the contractions down in a measurable way on the monitors.
It's fascinating, isn't it? To think that, I mean, it's perhaps not easy, but such a simple technique to be able to practice and to intuitively know within your body. I think that you hit the nail on the head there with this idea of being told to relax more. And anyone who has been through fertility challenges can relate to that. You're hit with that sentiment left, right, and center. But that isn't really how it works. And we're seeing so much more research coming through these days that really does link this ability to regulate your stress levels and your nervous system with improved fertility and pregnancy outcomes. So can you explain a little bit about what is this stress cycle? Like, what is the problem with the incomplete stress cycle, and how does that impact your body?
Yeah. So I think when we talk about stress, what we mean by that is a threat cycle, right? That something was perceived as a threat. And that perception does not happen because I chose it to be like, oh, I think I'm going to be scared of this interaction right now. And then I go into a threat cycle. That's not how it happens, right? It happens outside of conscious awareness. It happens before thoughts can be formed. It's instinctive because it's supposed to be protective. Each of the threat states that we can be in have a separate constellation of changes that happen in our body. So for example, if we use the terminology of, okay, my body's put me in a flight state. Well, first of all, my body puts me in that flight state because it has ascertained that that is the safest way to survive this moment, right? So again, not by choice. I'm not sitting here going, I need to get out of here. My body chose that on its own. It decided that and put me in that state. The blood flow patterns that change, the muscle movements that change, the changes to our respiration, our cardiovascular system, our digestion, all of that are in line to do one thing, and that is to get me to leave the situation that my body has determined is threatening, right? Now, what happens when we say that a cycle isn't complete is I stay in that state and I never get to actually leave. Right? And that happens a lot in cases of medical trauma, birth trauma, fertility trauma, even absolutely, is that you might be medicated, you might be anesthetized, you might be like me and not able to. I mean, I guess I could have gotten out of bed if I wanted to. Nobody was going to stop me, but I didn't want to, right? Because I believed that lying there in this Trendelenburg position was part of the package that helped keep my baby alive and keep me pregnant for as long as I was. And so we stay still, and we stay still when our body is actually needing movement. The opposite is also true, where if we are if our body puts us in a freeze state, which is not an immediate state, it is one that comes a little bit later, right? A little bit later down the road. If we're not able to run or leave, if we're not able to address the threat head on, or if we're stuck in those two states for too long, then we go into a protective, we're going to shrink and we're going to move less, right? In those states, though, if you can imagine, our world pushes us to keep going. Show up to work, show up for our families, go do these responsibilities. You've got a full calendar. And so now we're moving when our body is asking us not to. So you see where the discrepancy is. When we stay in that discrepancy, or we stay in these states for too long, that becomes an interrupted threat cycle. And we cannot complete the movement patterns, either more movement or lack of movement, in a way that our body needs. And when we stay there, we get stuck there. All other body systems are still functioning as if that threat is still right there. And that means I have changes in my blood flow still, changes in my thought patterns, or even access to certain parts of my brain, changes to my cardiovascular system. And those changes do also apply to reproductive and perinatal health, because the other systems that are affected by this are the endocrine system, hormones, and the immune system, which often we see in the form of inflammation. And that's how these are all connected.
Oh, it's just an endless cycle, isn't it? And I'm sure so many people can relate to this idea of sitting in their doctor's office or getting that phone call with awful results, and you don't know what to do with your body's response, because I think you liken it back to our ancestors who were literally running from predators or things that were going to kill them. But your brain doesn't know the difference between, oh, that bear is coming to attack me, and I'm now being told that, IVF is potentially not an issue for me, and I don't know what the next stage on my journey is. And you want to run away from the situation, but that's not appropriate. And, your body doesn't know how to deal with that. So I think that people discount what an impact these experiences have on their bodies and their brains and their nervous systems. We're told that trauma is things like, returned war veterans or people who've been through natural disasters or, victims of assault, these things. And obviously they are all very traumatic experiences, but these things that we go through, and especially when we're talking about loss and recurrent loss, these are so traumatic, aren't they? And it's one of those things that we don't give enough credit to. The other problem I find with that is that once you do learn about how traumatic it is and you acknowledge it, it's this horrible state of, well, I could have done something to do better. I could have made that situation better. I could have prevented my miscarriage, all of these horrible things that we say to ourselves. So how can we walk this line between knowing what's happening in the body addressing it and doing something about it, but not placing blame.
Mhm.
Sort of a big question. How can we
Yeah.
start to address that?
Well, I think, and you can appreciate this, I'm sure. I think when you do true trauma informed work, it immediately removes the blame because what
Mm,
it does is it asks a different question. It's not what did I do wrong or what can I fix next time? It's how does what's happening to me in this current moment right now make perfect sense given what I survived?
mm,
And when you ask that question, you start to get different answers,
mm,
right? And it doesn't have to be just with traumatic stress, right? I think when we ask people to ask different questions, that can feel overwhelming at first. And so you can start really small. You can start really small. So I'm sitting here right now and I can feel my leg is bouncing up and down underneath my desk. What does that tell me? How does that make sense, right? Instead of why is that happening? How do I stop it?
mm,
The question is, how does that make sense given what's going on right now for me? Right. And say, if I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling excited, my body's wanting to move. I typically do these podcast interviews standing up for that reason because my body likes to move. I just couldn't do that today. But I can feel the energy and like, oh, that's why that's happening. We
mm,
suddenly start to ask different questions. We get different answers, and those answers are not tied to something I did wrong. Right.
mm,
And I say all of that knowing fully that for years I blamed myself. For years. What did I do? What could I have done differently? Because it's easier for us to do that than it is to be in our bodies differently, even if being in our bodies differently is better for us.
mm,
That's just how it is in our bodies. Our human brains, mammalian brains will always choose familiar over what's better for us. Always, 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 always. That's just how we're built because that's the safest way, usually. Right
mm,
now, we're finding going, oh, wait, but we can actually use these newer parts of our brain that we have that no other mammals have to override that and say, let me try something different. It's scary, absolutely, because you're going into the unknown. You're trying something that's uncertain of how it's going to turn out. But we start with asking different questions, not what's wrong with me? How do I fix this? How do I make this better? How does this make perfect sense given what I
mm.
survived?
It's such a beautiful way to look at it. How can someone know if they have experienced an incomplete stress cycle, if that trauma response is really affecting their body? What are some of the symptoms or some of the things that they might be noticing within their bodies or just their life day to day?
Yeah, I love that question because the signs are everywhere. They're everywhere. We just have to be ready to look and see them. And usually, in my experience, and maybe this is your experience too, Jennifer, is we know.
Mm,
We know, like something's up. And maybe we won't use that word, right? Maybe people may not resonate with the word trauma yet, or maybe this isn't quite connecting, but we know something's up. And usually, what I find is you think back to when did it begin? And a lot of times it's tied back to that moment. I think about clients where they suddenly had insomnia and that didn't happen. They were sleeping great before. And you kind of tie it back to, oh, well, that started after my daughter was in the NICU and it's been 3 years and nothing's helped. You see a lot of inflammation in people. So you might see it as a new autoimmune disorder. You might
mm,
see it as an exacerbation of existing autoimmune issues, like joints start getting swollen. You get the same kind of swelling or edema in your bodies. You might notice changes to your cardiovascular system, right? So now increased blood pressure when you never had blood pressure problems before, digestive issues when you didn't have them before that you can track back, or things that maybe were kind of beginning before the medical trauma, but now are exacerbated since then. You'll also find that for a lot of people, because it's an incomplete movement pattern, there's tension in the body.
mm,
Shoulders ache, neck aches, like your arms are just regularly tired, or something's just not, it doesn't feel like you can ever fully, quote unquote, relax because you can't, because your body's still stuck in that same pattern, right? And then, outside of the body, you might notice it in relationship patterns, right? You might notice that you're picking fights with people more, or
mm,
maybe you're here's what I see a lot with clients is they get really sucked into the drama online in the comment section of something or the other. Why is that happening? It's because it's matching the physiological state that we're in, and it finally feels like something works, because otherwise what we're doing is squashing that so that we can function in the world where that threat state doesn't have a place. Right? You're not going to go pick a fight with your supervisor at work every day or your colleagues at work every day, but you go online, you see the fighting happening online, you go, and it's not a thought, but it goes, oh, this matches. This is what's happening. This is familiar, right? And so I'm going to stay here, because our bodies pick familiar over what's better for us always.
Oh, I think so many of us can relate to that. And it's funny, isn't it? You think, why am I doing this? Why am I going down the Google rabbit hole at 2 a.m. when I know this is bad for me? I need to sleep. But you can't help yourself in so many instances, can you? It's almost like you get addicted to being in this stress response. Would that be the correct terminology to say kind of your body gets addicted to it?
I wouldn't say addicted, only because I think addiction has its own separate pathophysiology. But yeah, I think what you're talking about is it feels addictive because it feels safe. And why does it feel safe? Because it matches what we're feeling, what we're going through, what our body is experiencing. It's, we're in that threat state. And so then we take in information that matches that threat state. And that goes, yep, that's why we're here. This is why. This makes sense. It keeps us here. And what I found is, when we start to understand, why is this happening? Not just, hey, I'm in this threat state, therefore I'm going to be up at 2 a.m. scrolling, but there's movement patterns that were interrupted. There is survival stress that is in my body that is there to get me to move. I can't move right now because it's 2 a.m. I'm supposed to be sleeping. And so how does it come out? Sometimes it comes out as restless leg syndrome. Sometimes it comes out as us scrolling. Sometimes it comes out in, a variety of different ways. But it's all because your body's trying to go, you're supposed to be moving right now and you're not. Right? Or the flip, right?
Yes.
And so everything has an explanation. And I think that's what I love about it, because it takes away the uncertainty that we've lived with for so long. And it takes away that vacuum that we tend to fill with blame. There's no room for it anymore.
Oh, that's such a better way of looking at it, isn't it? Knowing that you are doing things that you don't want to be doing, or that aren't good for you, because your brain is trying to keep you safe. It thinks that it's doing a good job. And it doesn't recognize that potentially isn't healthy for you in other ways. So how can we get out of this? I mean, if we are stuck in these patterns where we notice we're picking fights with our partner, we're not sleeping well, we're noticing inflammation within the body, immune issues, gosh, where do you even start to regulate some of these things?
Yeah. Your listeners may not like what I have to say, but what we have to start with is total and complete acceptance first. We have to fully accept that what we went through and survived was traumatic, which I know is difficult to do, especially when we start comparing with other people. Well, at least my baby came home from the NICU. Well, at least I didn't need the NICU. Hey, well, at least I delivered full term. Like, not everybody gets to do that, right? We start comparing and then we start minimizing for ourselves. And I find that as easy as it sounds as I'm saying it, it's actually quite difficult for us to do. So I think that's really important to start there and accept, yes, what you survived was traumatic, regardless of what anyone around you is telling you or expecting of you. And I think the next step is getting really comfortable asking the question, how does it make sense? Because as long as we keep asking the question, how do I fix it? And it may not come out in those words, right? We hear a lot of, well, how do I regulate my emotions? That comes from a place of fixing. It comes from a place of assuming that dysregulated emotions right now are inappropriate or they're wrong. And they're not always wrong. Just because you're dysregulated does not mean that and something has to be done about it. I actually just had a client call the other day with a parent. She was not a pregnancy client, but she just was like, help me with my child. And so she was describing how I just want my child, who's a little bit older, I want my child to learn how to regulate. I want them to learn how to regulate. And I said, well, what is the context within which that's happening? And turns out the child's getting bullied at school. And I said, no. Then dysregulation makes perfect sense because that's protective. And so we have to get away from this question of how do I stop or how do I start, and really get comfortable asking, how does this make sense? How does it make sense? And that doesn't mean we stay here forever. That doesn't mean anxiety is your forever. It doesn't mean chronic pain is your forever. But what it does do is it helps us approach it from a different place. Because as long as we're trying to fix it, there's always going to be the backdrop of self-blame. And then I found, just with working with so many clients over the years, there's a limit to how much progress we can make, because at the back of it all is, I'm bad, I'm broken, I suck. But if we can get to that place of how does it make sense? Not even how was it not my fault? Like, I know you can't believe that. It's hard to believe early on in the process, for sure. And there are some days I still struggle with that. But if you ask that question, how does it make sense? It opens the door to tremendous compassion. You kind of see yourself the way others see you. Go, oh, I survived that. Oh, okay. That's where we are. You see how it softens the experience. And then it's no longer a to-do list of how to regulate. It is, now we're just going to take the cues from your body and go, what comes next?
Isn't that such an important way to look at it? You know, being able to, I always say the first step is acceptance, and just noticing where you're at and being okay with that. Not having to like it, but not judging it, you know, just being able to say, look, this is where my body is at, and we're not going to fix, quote unquote, everything in a day. It's going to take time. But it's worth it. I find this work it's simple, but it's not easy, is it? You know, it's isn't that right? You know, it takes time and it takes consistency. And that's another thing people don't want to hear. They're like, well, I want to get pregnant now. You know, I don't want to address all this stuff. I just want you to give me the answer. But if we are talking about being able to look at what's happening within the body, and then kind of intuitively knowing, you know, on days where I am feeling anxious, I need to move. I need to get outside, go for a brisk walk. Maybe I need to shake out my body. If I'm in a state of freeze and I'm just really struggling to get motivated, maybe that's a day where I say, you know what, it's all right to just be on the couch this afternoon. I might just need to read a book, have a cup of tea, just embrace where my body is at. What then happens within your body, hormonally within the body, and how can being able to meet your body where it's at and stop this constant, it's like the broken cycle that keeps trying to complete itself but never really gets to. Once we're allowing the body to complete that stress cycle, what then happens within your hormones? How does that support your overall health? And probably for those listening, how does that then support your body's reproductive hormones as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we talked about is stopping the stopping of the cycle, right? That's what we just talked about.
Yeah.
There's a whole piece on how to complete threat cycles, but we start to see changes as the completion begins, you know, and this is, I think, again, where the sensory and sensory motor pieces come in, is that we can get into the body very easily through the senses, much more easily than you can with the movement, even though everything we've been talking about is movement patterns. Coming in sensorially is actually much gentler for a lot of people. And so that helps to begin kind of the completion process. But once you're kind of on the way there, you don't even have to complete, as in, you know, cross a finish line. Your body's looking for opportunities to come back to what we call homeostasis, right? To come back to what your home base is. And so as you start doing the work, you're going to start to see the changes. And some of those changes, as it pertains to reproductive health and fertility, one of the biggest ones is a decrease in inflammation. You can be, and this is the thing that blows my mind every time I work with clients, is that they're doing everything they can prior, you know, anti-inflammatory diets and all these supplements, and they're getting outside and vitamin D and walking and exercising. They're doing everything. I mean, it's a lot. Their credit really goes to them, but it's still not enough, because this is the last piece that pushes it over, is that we leave the inflammatory state. A threat state is an inflammatory state. And so I'm always telling people you cannot reduce inflammation effectively, like sustainably effectively, until you leave the threat state and stay out of a threat state. Now, we're always going to go in and out of them, right? Like I'm feeling fine right now, but then I'm going to cross the street, and if a car is coming too fast to me, I'm going to enter a threat state again. The goal is not to avoid threat states. It's to, if you get into them, you get out of them quickly and you stay out for as long as possible, right? That's the ideal goal. And so we see a decrease in inflammation. When we see a decrease in inflammation, we start to see a balancing of reproductive hormones for both men and women. And here's the thing, right? I say this as somebody with other underlying hormone problems. So if you have any other medical conditions, some of them do get significantly better and some of them don't. And so what you're doing is you'll bring it back down to what your baseline was. And then you may need some medical interventions, and that's totally fine. But it comes back down to your baseline. So you're kind of like, okay, we can reset. Let's start over and see what happens.
Yeah, amazing. And what happens when the stress response is triggered by a memory? So it might be that you were at your doctor's clinic and you found out you'd lost your baby, or any range of traumatic things that happen, and it's that memory of what you went through. And you can't stop memories from coming up, but how can we acknowledge the memory, because it will always be there, without it re-triggering this stress cycle within the body? Or can we even do this?
We can do this. Yes, my clients do this. It is absolutely possible. And I really want your listeners to hear that, right? It is possible. This is not an impossible task that we're talking about, but it takes work, like you said. And a lot of it takes work prior to your next pregnancy, because we need to build that muscle ahead of time when you're not in a state that is going to bring up those memories. Because like you said, the memories can be, you go back to the doctor and you find out about another loss. More often than not, though, those memories begin way before that. They begin as somatic memories, so body-based memories, because the feeling of being in early pregnancy, for example, you may not have a conscious memory of exactly that moment when I felt like this, but your body remembers. And we call them state-dependent memories. So when you're in that particular state of 4-ish, 5-ish weeks, right? And the changes that have happened in your body, the fullness of your breasts and kind of the fullness in your pelvic area that's, feeling a little more full than usual, but nobody knows, and you may not even know. Your body knows. And that in and of itself can trigger a memory, right? And it's not a cognitive one that you can think back on, but it's one that feels very familiar. I hear from a lot of clients where any kind of discharge or wetness can trigger somatic memories of their loss or their potential loss from previous pregnancies, right? So state-dependent memories can come up even before these experiential memories can. And what we do is, it's not about, like we said, avoiding the memory, like you said, right? We're not going to try to avoid them. They're going to happen. They're going to come. What we have to do instead is practice not letting the threat state pull us fully into that spiral from before. That what we can do is almost like have a curiosity-based approach to what's happening, to go, oh, here it is again. I can feel it happening again. And so that in and of itself is not triggering alarms. You can kind of see it, observe it, and go, I understand what's happening. And then I know how to support my body to come out of it. But that works best when you start practicing it before you're there.
So much easier said than done, isn't it? But you're right. And when I do some of this work with students, they, especially if they've been through loss, they don't want to, get rid of these memories, because they want to always honor their baby and, respect that time that they had with them.
Yes.
And I always try to reassure people, it is not about forgetting about your baby and what you've been through, right? It's about acknowledging these memories and kind of holding them in a bittersweet way where you can remember them, but it doesn't have that huge physiological impact within your body every time that you bring them up. So thank you for sharing that. I often get asked why things like talk therapy and counseling aren't helpful to a certain point. And don't get me wrong, like these tools are incredibly helpful. I mean, we know that intellectualizing what we've been through and being able to share and
using language is so incredibly important. But I found this particularly on my journey. It got to a point where seeing my therapist and talking about what I was going through, it kind of made me feel more miserable. And I wasn't getting to where I wanted to be. All I could think about was the losses that I'd been through and, how I was never going to move forward. So why does talk therapy only work to a point? And what is the solution if you find that you're in that state?
Yeah. So I say this as somebody who's originally trained in clinical psychology and did talk therapy for the early parts of my career. I left that field because of what I went through, because I also recognized the limitations of it. And I knew, having been the patient, that is not what I needed. And still, I still tried it once my son came home from the NICU, and we met up with, we tried to think a couple of therapists, and it was the same experience as you, just not quite getting there. And I think the reason why is twofold. One is what we experienced wasn't thought-based. What we experienced was a very visceral experience that's in our body. And really, if you can think back to moments of that experience, you'll find that there weren't a lot of thoughts that were happening then either. Because when we're in that threat state, that part of our brain shuts off. It is intended to shut off because it's protective. And so I find that there's a mismatch then between what our experience was, what our body went through, and then what we're trying to do afterwards, which is our body went through it, but now we're going to talk ourselves out of it, which you can imagine, right? It's like trying to learn how to swim by reading a book. Like at some point you have to get in the pool to do it, right? And I think the second piece of that's missing is that while we as humans are meaning-making animals, we love to make meaning. We experience the world through stories. We connect through stories, and that is exceptionally powerful and so important. I think the timing of it also matters. That if our body is not in a place yet to be able to make meaning through words, then again, there's a mismatch. But I find that if we do the somatic work first, and from our perspective, the sensory and sensory motor work first, we complete those threat cycles. We help you integrate that experience so that, like you said, you're not forgetting, you're making it a part of your new reality. Then we're in a completely different body with access to those parts of our brain that can really benefit from making meaning of what happened. And by making meaning, I don't mean why did this happen and how does it make sense and how did I deserve it, but really just what is the story of what I went through and how can I make it make sense for me?
That's such a lovely way of explaining it. Thank you. Can you tell me a little bit about Revel? What is your company about? What is the work that you do, and how can people learn more about it?
Oh, sure. So Revel is the company based off of all this work that I've done with clients over many years. It's, having worked with clients from all around the world, we've found patterns of what is most helpful for people when they're trying to conceive, when they're going through a high-risk pregnancy, and then afterwards. And so through our courses and our products in our shop, we teach these somatic, these neurobiological, sensory and sensory motor approaches to health and healthcare. So we help people in that period, not when they're actively trying to conceive, but they're in that place of, I just went through this terrible thing. I don't know if I want to try yet, but I know I'm not done, but what do I do? Or you're not medically clear to try to conceive and you're like, I don't want to just sit here waiting. What can I do? So we have that. We've got things through the pregnancy itself that deals with some of the somatic memories that pop up because of what you've been through before, and then how to kind of restore health after it's all over. And between that, and then we do a lot of professional trainings on how to do this work with patients and clients. So best place to reach us is through our website. All the links for everything are there at ruvel.com.
Amazing. Thank you. And I will link all of those in the show notes. And it's so important what you said there, this idea of after it all happening. And people think, and I was very much of this train of thought where I thought, I'm going to have my baby, I'm going to bring him home and I'll be fine. Then I will be past all of this. I'll move on. It won't bother, but that is not how it works. It's not how your body works. And you will hold on to this stuff
forever unless you do something to actively work through it. So thank you so much for the work that you do, for the way you explain everything so beautifully, Parijat. And I just so appreciate you being here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening right to the end of this episode. And if you haven't already, check out Parijat's podcast called Delivering Miracles. I will link it in the show notes. It is one of the best podcasts I think I've heard in relation to all of this work. And it is so specific to infertility and pregnancy loss. And that's really hard to find. Now, on the next episode, which is going to be the very last one for the year, I am talking to fertility therapist Naomi Wolfson about managing triggers through the holidays. This is a timely and super important episode. So if you are dreading the lead up to Christmas, all of the things that go along with that, it's an episode you won't want to miss. So until then, I am sending you all my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.